those are very intimate paintings. You were asking about that. Sort of a kiss folded out. See the way they're sort of kissing her on the side of the mouth, but on the side of the mouth, so you get her whole profile here. And she's in a sort of Saint Teresa of Avila-like swoon. Her eyes are slightly open. But this has a wonderful, it's also quite like a sketch, you know, where she's floating on this cloud. It's quite marvelous.
Point out those fingers again. I didn't get that on tape.
Here, this Amorino is cradling her head with his hand, so he's supporting her neck because her neck is gone completely limp. È amore,
dolce, proprio vero.
della
Non
passione.
va niente di profano,
No.
Così tenero,
Tenero,
dolce,
sì.
vero?
Niente di profano, assolutamente no. Beautiful head, the way this is painted.
Sì.
Marvelous rendering of this cloud. It's really a nice picture.
I got hungry and I got claustrophobic.
Oh yeah?
Jeez.
Io voglio fare delle ricerche al soggetto di questo. We're standing in the church of Santa Maria Gloriosa dei Frari, one of the principal churches of Venice. And as you see as we walk through it, this church is filled with some extraordinary monuments. Monuments to some of the leading citizens of Venice. We're standing, in fact, right in front of the tomb of Titian. And as the camera turns around 180 degrees and pans over the vast marble tomb that was built in the 18th century, it's somewhat a sad example of Venice honoring its most famous painter. The quality of the tomb is not at the highest. But you see behind the statue of Titian himself, seated in the middle, is rendered in relief, a picture of the Assumption of the Virgin. You see her in that bank of clouds up above with the apostles down below. Now, as the camera moves 90 degrees to the left, you'll see the very same picture on the high altar of the church through the arch of the choir screen. And if we move the cameraman slightly to the right, you'll be able to see the image that we were looking at a moment ago on the tomb, the Assumption of the Virgin, one of the masterpieces by Titian, painted about 1515, and it shows here again the Virgin being assumed into heaven, being received by God Father and, of course, Christ up above, while the apostles are arrayed below the open tomb. Here's an example of what we call the Renaissance style, or really the High Renaissance style, at its fullest and most breathtaking. when we get up closer, we'll be able to see that these figures, which are almost life-size, if not over life-size, are reacting with extraordinary passion and fervor to the miracle that's taking place above them. But if we pan 90 degrees to the left, you'll see a scaffolding, but just above it, the words of Canova on the tomb. And here we find the tomb of the great artist Canova. Unfortunately, we can't see the procession which leads into this pyramid. You can just about see their heads over the top of the funeral procession walking into the tomb itself. But this church is filled with extraordinary sculpture and painting, and it's one of the major stops on any tour of Venice. The leading Venetian sculptors of the 16th century. You see him representing St. Jerome, the penitent St. Jerome, who stands, book in hand, positioned on his thigh, with a rock in his hand, with which he's been beating his breast. His lion sits and looks up at him on the right. Here you see the image of the ascetic, the hermit saint, out in the wilderness, nude except for the drapery that's wrapped around him, muscled like one of the figures of Michelangelo, which was certainly an inspiration for Victoria, but also with a degree of realism that one sees in late Hellenistic sculpture. Here one's trying to get across the idea of spiritual strength and physical asceticism. In the Russian Orthodox Church, even today, this is as close as you can get to the altar. Right. So that you had the lay people out here, and the only way they could see the mass that was going on would be, through this opening. If you couldn't walk, you couldn't go into this section. It was only during the Counter-Reformation that they began to tear down the old choir screens and make it possible for the general population to get up involved in the mass. So this choir screen would have, in all likelihood, extended to either side. And every now and then, in certain Renaissance churches, you'll see reminiscences of it. But this dates to the late, I believe it's the late 15th century. The faces they're almost like masks. They have no individuality, no personality to them. They're very awkward in their stances, ill-proportioned. They have no sense of grandeur.
Let's stand in front of it so I can get a, that's good. Wow. That gives you an idea how long it is.
Those two cities on it, which must be cities that he conquered with Venice. And the same thing is true on this tomb over on the left, which is both sculpted and frescoed. You see this triumphal procession up above, the figure standing on top of his own tomb, supported by three figures, caryatids carrying the sarcophagus on their backs. from the probably early 16th, late 15th century.
Yes.
What you're looking at here is the great altarpiece, or the high altar of Santa Maria Gloriosa dei Frari, painted by Titian in 1518. And this painting, which we saw at a distance a while ago, is the Assumption of the Virgin. Basically, you see the scene divided in two halves. Stoplight of the Virgin being assumed into heaven, being greeted by God Father up above, surrounded by Putin, fills the topmost portion of this huge altarpiece. While down below, the apostles surrounding the empty tomb react in different ways, for the most part, looking up in amazement, wonder, and reverence as the Virgin goes to heaven. But here, Titian's clearly learned his lessons from Raphael and Michelangelo. He's created a heroic altarpiece with great figures gesticulating, reaching upward, creating a spiritual bridge between heaven and earth. With rich colors, rich reds, greens, and whites. It's one of Titian's most dramatic and effective compositions. Particularly striking is the pose of the Virgin, who's standing, her arms spread upward, her head tilted up toward God Father in a gesture of love and reception. She is assumed into heaven to assume her rightful place as the intercessor for man. Three, 4 levels, sometimes even more, 5. With double images of the Doge, sometimes shown on his sarcophagus, as he is here on the left, recumbent, and then alive, standing down below, flanked by figures on either side, virtues. Up above, you will sometimes see men in arms, which are symbols of the personal virtue of the Doge. And always around the sarcophagus are different virtues, theological virtues. And of course, at the very top, in this particular tomb, you see the figure of Christ in the lunette, the figure of Christ standing on top of his tomb, pointing to his side wound, a reminder that out of death came resurrection. And of course, at the very apex of the tomb is the figure of God Father himself. So what you have here is a cycle of personal salvation, starting from the image of the live image of the Doge at the base of the tomb, proceeding to his recumbent image on his sarcophagus, vertically up to the resurrected Christ, and finally God Father above.
Yeah.
Open the window and the shutter and watch the pigeons in the boats. to get a picture of this one in the middle one. That's what's really.
Attaboy. Now I have it. Tom, can you sing?
Sing. Hey, you're in a church. Behave accordingly. None of this nonsense. I'll throw you both out of here. In front of me is the baptismal font. Here's an octagonal, probably also a kind of superstructure for but you see how they use space. They're creating one point with 1 point perspective. They're creating the illusion of depth, but in an ordered, contained kind of space.
All of inlaid wood.
All inlaid wood. Cityscapes, city squares with using like tiles on the kitchen floor, big blocks of marble to give you a sense of recession into space. As you go back, each line gets smaller and smaller. It gives you the impression that you're walking along. Great masterwork by Titian in this church. It's the Madonna of the Pesaro, which basically means it's commissioned by the Pesaro family, and it was done in 1526. And here again you see the Virgin and Child seated on this high block with two great columns framing the composition in the back. On the right is St. Francis of Assisi, and standing directly behind him is another saint who I can't identify at the moment. Directly in front of the Virgin, wearing a brilliant blue cloak with a yellow drapery around it is, of course, St. Peter. And you see the key by his foot, which identifies him as St. Peter. St. Francis is gesturing down toward the figures kneeling on the lower right, and St. Peter is addressing the figure kneeling at the lower left, all of whom are members of the Pesaro family. So this is Titian. This is Titian, 1526. Here again, you have this very extraordinary setting, architectural setting, which, in a certain sense, makes no architectural sense. But what Titian is doing is creating a magnificent backdrop for the image of the Holy Family and the intercession of the eponymous saints of the Pesaro family as they are presented to the Virgin and Child. So these columns, you see past the columns into the brilliant blue sky with clouds. The banner of the family is held by this figure in armor, on the black armor on the left, who also is bringing with him a turbaned man, undoubtedly a prisoner, a Turk, captured by the member of the Pesaro family. So this image is one that both exalts the Madonna and Child, but at the same time exalts the members of the family who are being presented to her within the public context of this great church in Venice. So it was meant to be seen as a pious homage by the Pesaro family to the
middle of the
1526,
15th century.
1526. So you see here the level of realism, in a sense. This is about the time that Raphael, a little bit later, when Raphael was doing the ceilings, the stanza, slightly later than Titian and Raphael and Michelangelo, during this time of the teens and 1520s, developing a new diction for painting, a new style for painting, one in which the figures were both realistic and heroic.
on a larger scale, natural, yet idealized at the same time, of this world, yet somehow above this world.
In the way the Madonna and the Child stand out.
Of his foot. And the Virgin with her proper left hand, is holding his other foot between her two fingers, right? And her veil is over his head. So there's special attention being paid to the feet of Christ and to his head. He holds the Virgin's veil, it kind of frames his head. Well, that isn't just a sort of an afterthought. The Titian here is expressing a fundamental notion about the very nature of Christ. It's called the hypostatic union. And the hypostatic union means it's a theological concept which expresses the dual nature of Christ as both man and God. This is the great mystery that God gave his Son to mankind, and he was both human and divine at the same time. So the divinity of Christ was frequently signaled by the lower half of his body, especially his feet, because it touched the earth, touched the ground. So whenever you see the Christ child's foot being held by the Virgin between her fingers, or she touches it or seems to pinch it in some way, it's a clear indication, it's a signal of the human nature of Christ. When his head is picked out in some way, framed by drapery in this case, that he holds up in the Virgin, the head of Christ, the upper half of his body, but especially his head, is symbolic of his divine nature. So it's an allusion to the great mystery of the Incarnation.
Ceilings, you'll see. Oh, look, they're moving the thing by. They're working on. It smells like they're varnishing.
Smells like varnish.
The ceiling, this elaborate carved wooden ceiling, inset with paintings by Tintoretto, is a fabulous example of
Così.
on the front, crowned by a great curvilinear frontispiece. The interior is of a refined elegance in its marble revetment. In the vaults, there are niches with busts of the saints, painted by Pietro Maria Pennacchi in 1528. And the tribune, elevated at the back of the front of the church, there is a balustrade with a profusion of rich decorations by Tullio Lombardo. I've never been in this church before. This is a first. Even though it's in this church. Oh, look at that ceiling.
That was clean and deceased.
You see, they're cleaning it right now. Is they had a block and they cut it right down the middle of the block and then folded it out so that what you have is a mirror image. It looks like a Rorschach ink blot test. But each Each panel is perfectly symmetrical with the other. Incredible.
Come on, no, duck.
Okay. We're now standing in one of the most famous squares in all of Venice. We're looking at straight ahead of us the Scuola di San Marco, a Renaissance building of the late 15th century, which today functions as a hospital. But you can see its architectural style is very similar to the Church of Santa Maria dei Miracoli, which we just came from. And on the right, the Church of San Giovanni e Paolo, a great Gothic church erected by the Dominicans between the year 1246 and 1430. You see in particular the great central Gothic portal made from marble by Bartolomeo Bone of around 1460. And of course, the equestrian monument that you see here on the right, if you pan right and up, the monument to Napoleone, a masterpiece of Renaissance equestrian sculpture by Andrea Verrocchio, 1488. One of the first, if not the first, equestrian monuments of the Renaissance. And here again, you can think back to Rome and the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. That's the kind of monument that artists were looking at as they began to recreate the monuments of ancient Rome. So one has to remember that this was erected to a Venetian general, a condottiere, who served the Republic well, and it was erected posthumously in his honor. Antique tomb, wall tomb, built to one of the Mocenigo family. This dates to the 16th century. I mentioned in the Frari today, the Venetians had a penchant for making huge tombs that went into the wall, and this is certainly an example. The ones on either side, on the right, and it's banded on the left, are tombs of the late 15th century. The one on the left has just been recently cleaned, so it used to be almost gray, and now you can see that the whiteness of the marble really stands out. Go tomb by Pietro Lombardo from 1485. And here you see the Doge standing, the statue of the Doge standing on top of the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus is carried by 3 figures on their shoulders, 2 armed and 1 not. And in the center of the sarcophagus is a panel with the inscription Ex Hostium Nanibus, from enemy booty. It was made from enemy booty. And I think one of the great artists, Venetian artists of the early 18th century. It was done in 1727. And what it shows is the glory of Saint Dominic, who was being carried heavenward on the backs of angels. And at the very center of the composition, you see Christ gesturing downward, the dove of the Holy Spirit above him, and God Father on the right. the Virgin just below God's feet, looking down to receive him as he is carried up to heaven in triumph. This is typical of this early 18th century, where the ceiling is opened up to a vast field, and we seem to be standing right down below, looking up as it takes place over our very head. We have, in effect, a window on the heavens. The perspective is correct. You can see the bottoms of the saints' feet. The foreshortening of the figures is also done extremely carefully, taking into account our point of view. Angels hover over our heads. We're looking up at them, seeing their knees, tops of their feet. And this idea of infinite space opening above our heads is very clearly defined, as the darker colors are around the outer edge, and the lighter colors, the whites and reds and creams and roses, are concentrated at the center of the composition. The bronze reliefs on each side wall are probably also dated about the same period, although I don't know who the artist is. They also depict scenes from the life of St. Dominic.
And here we have Dr. Colombo examining the foot of St. Catherine de Siena. Dr. Colombo, did she have foot problems?
Well, seems that the skin is still there. Skin should be gone, bones only. But you still see the skin. This church is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. A little closer, that's it. Now you get an idea of how huge that chair, that throne is. Go ahead.
There's a dome, but the dome is inside. You don't see a dome from the outside.
Oh.
And the lights come in from top to bottom, in the main altar and the two side altars, giving it a brilliant and beautiful appearance.
Yes, and we saw that on the inside. Okay, Tom, I can walk. Oh, yeah, you can walk. That's right. Now I'll have the attaboy. See? And we have the streets in the background.
What happened to la
With all the cars
Gambi?
Oh.
La chiesa della Gamba. I'm gonna go up in front.
Hi, Michael.
Find a way.
No.
the name?
Yeah, and I have the rates too. It's cheaper than where we were staying.
Okay.
Okay, Michael, tell us where we're at, what we're doing.
Well, here we are in Venice. It's been a great trip. We're on the train on the way to Milan, where we will arrive at 9:20 this evening. Hopefully in one piece. And that's the way it is. Wednesday, June 9th. A very special day, my birthday.
Oh yeah,
1990.
happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Buona notte.
The Biennale was for the most part.
No, there was, if you wanted to take a photograph, they'd stop for you and pose and then continue on.
Yeah, they were doing
This is my last chance to use the video camera.
Party's over. It's time to
Party's
call
over.
it a day. Let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah, we're gonna leave, but we had a great time.
Right,
Now I hope we arrive safely.
good.
1, 2, 3,
I'd like
4,
to introduce Michael DeAngelis,
TWA.
unknown man, the unknown tourist, who, although was on this trip, doesn't appear in any of the videos.
I was here.
He was here.
Nomine Fide, Spiritus Sancti. Very
When you're
good.
through, press the button. Press the red button.
He's like Gilroy.